Hello everyone. Oh, excuse me. Hello everyone. My name's Kai Swanson. I am so happy you're joining us for this virtual tour. I love giving tours when folks come back to campus, and hopefully we'll see each other in person soon. I'm a member of the class of 1986 and I work in the office of the president, but today I'm all yours. Let's talk a little bit about the history of Augustana College. How on earth did we wind up in this beautiful spot? Well, there's a story there. It starts not here, but in Jefferson Prairie, Wisconsin. A group of immigrants, mostly from Sweden, some from Norway, decided they needed to have an educational institution to call their own. And they set up Augustana College and Theological Seminary, not in Rock Island, but in Chicago, right about where Geno's East is, down in the Loop. So think about that next time you get in a deep dish. They went there and they set up the school in Emmanuel Lutheran Church, near the corner of LaSalle and Wells. They stayed there for 3 years and decided to move to Paxton, Illinois. They were there for about 12 years, missing the Great Chicago Fire, when they decided they had missed the boat where all the Swedes were immigrating. So they sent out a professor to find a new place. His name was Hans Reck, and what he found was this beautiful patch of land midway between Rock Island and Moline. And in 1875, we moved here. Our first major gift upon arriving in Rock Island was a gift of cash from a fellow named Frederick Weyerhaeuser, who owned a lumber yard. Why? Well, because Professor Reck made a special petition praying that the board would make provision for a fence that we might protect our edifice from the tramping feet and dirty deposits of cows. Yes, we were in a cow pasture. We came here then. The first building was a little off in that direction. It stood from 1875 until 1935. But the real magic started happening in the 1880s when we started working on Old Main, this beautiful building behind me, the first Augustana building to be entered on the National Register of Historic Places. It was designed to somewhat evoke the image of the main building at the University of Uppsala, Sweden's very highly regarded medieval university where many of the early faculty had their advanced degrees. They wanted it to look that way until they got to the roof line. Then a couple of second-generation Swedish Americans said, now wait a minute guys, we're on this side of the Atlantic now, and over here, every building that's worth its salt has a dome. Look at the Capitol, look at the county courthouse. You gotta have a dome. And so, a dome they built, and that's why every other college in the Midwest has a bell tower. We got a dome, and I ain't trading. But you can see a lot about the Swedes who built this place just by looking at the corner of the building where we are now. On the sides and the front of the building, which we don't see, all of that beautiful LeClaire dolomite stone is smoothed off. But every stone so smooth cost a little extra. And those Swedes were thrifty. And so for the back side of the building, where our honored guests come, just like the folks who come to the kitchen door at home, they decided not to polish it off. That's why the back side of the building is a little bit rough. And that tells you something about the people who founded Augustana. Before we move any further, another sign of our Swedish heritage stands just over off camera a little bit here, and that is our beautiful bell tower. The bell tower was built in 1936 by 2 immigrants from Sweden because there's a bell tower very much like this at the University of Uppsala. Theirs is so famous it has a name, the Gunilla. Here at Augustana, this is also famous because for many years it was believed that the person you might spend the rest of your life with, you'd kiss under that bell. So many a passionate kiss has been undertaken beneath the shadows of our own lovely bell. It doesn't have a name yet, so maybe you'd come up with a name. But the bell in that tower was struck in 1875 at a foundry in Cincinnati and came to us by riverboat. Tell you what, friends, now we're going to go find out about Emmy Avold. But you know what? Before we do, I can't resist one more story. If we look just a little bit over to the opposite direction, we're going to see a new feature on campus. That is the Ruth and Lefty Anderson Pavilion. This beautiful space for outdoor performance was a gift of Ruth and Lefty's children in keeping with their wishes that the performing arts always be kept alive and vibrant at Augustana. I want you to come to campus and read their plaque, where Ruth and Lefty left a message to all the students who might use it, and in it, Ruth said, "Disturb the august assembly." And I can't think of a better wish. Let's go learn more about Emmy Avold. Follow me. When you come to campus for your live in-person tour, I want you to expect to spend some time right here because I love to talk about this person behind me, Emmy Avold, one of the most extraordinary people in all the history of Augustana College. She found herself all alone as a recently widowed young woman in the 1890s when she decided to do something remarkable. She established the Augustana Women's Missionary Society. This was for the old Augustana Synod, the church that founded Augustana. She decided to let the men build churches and chapels. The women would build schools, hospitals, clinics, and what we today might call women's centers. And she did this all over the world. She raised money for 88 buildings on at least 4 continents, probably more that I'm not even aware of. But when the time came for Augustana College, the flagship of the Synod, to have a building for women students, Emmy knew she was going to take charge and do it. She headed up the fundraising for what was called the Augustana Woman's Building, which opened in 1928 and was funded almost entirely by the Augustana Women's Missionary Society. Now, this woman had a very strong character and a strong force of personality. And when she found out that the all-male board of the college had decided that her first 3 preferred locations would not work, she was pretty upset. So when the day came in November of 1928 that this building was to be dedicated, Emmy, and remember, this is before cell phones, Instagram, Facebook Live, she got the word out to the entire membership of the Women's Missionary Society. And on that day that they dedicated this building, not a single woman was present for the woman's building of Augustana College. Well, the feathers were smoothed over time, and Emmy once again was very proud to raise funds for Augustana College. But the things that she did in her career are truly astonishing. In 1922, a Swedish newspaper took a poll of all of its readers, and they decided she was the most important Swede then living abroad. And if you look very closely at the breast of her dress there, she's wearing a little ribbon. She was the first woman to be awarded the Norrstjärneorden, the North Star Order, the highest award the King of Sweden can give to a non-Swede. And she certainly deserved it. Now, in a moment, we're going to go hear about a millionaire in a bathing suit. And I want you to stick with us when we do. But first, I want to tell you about an important thing that happened here in the 1940s. Many of our alumni love Dr. Dorothy Parkander, who taught English at Augustana for 49 years. She was an undergrad at Augustana during World War II. And in those years, there were virtually no men on campus. They all went to fight in the war. The few exceptions were seminarians up at the seminary and a group of young cadets in the Navy's V-12 officer training program. Well, Dr. Parkander once shared with a select group of us that she was the most popular woman here. Why? Because her room in that corner was the only one that A, could not be seen from the house mother's apartment, and B, was close enough to the ground that a woman in skirts could throw a leg over the windowsill and step to the ground safely. So we asked Dr. Parkander if she helped her friends to get in and out of the building for late night dates. And she said yes. And then we asked Dr. Parkander, did you ever leave the building? And with that trademark twinkle in her sparkling blue eyes, she smiled and said, I'll never tell. Let's go find out about a millionaire wearing a bathing suit. Friends, I want to tell you about Roy J. Carver. Roy J. Carver had a great idea. The idea was to retread truck tires so that we wouldn't use as much rubber. It was economical, and it made him and his family a lot of money. Roy was always very generous with that money, and he gave the money that helped get the Roy J. Carver Center for Physical Education off the ground. Here's how it happened. He had used some facilities of the Augustana Research Foundation in establishing the basic chemistry of what he wanted to do. As his fortunes were growing and growing and growing, he took a phone call from John Kinshew, who was the chief advancement officer of the college in the early 70s. He said, John, come on down. I'm mostly living on my boat in Florida here, but we'll have breakfast. Kinshew traveled to Florida, and that day he came for breakfast on Roy Carver's boat, and there he was in a swimsuit and flip-flops. And I'll tell you what, the relationship has always been a very fruitful one, and the Carver families and the Carver Trusts have contributed to every single major building project on campus ever since. And it started with Florida orange juice, a guy in swim trunks, and a really good idea. Before we head out, a quick word about the Charlie Lindbergh Stadium, which is just off camera over here. You'd think you'd name a football stadium after a football star, wouldn't you? But in this case, we named it after a champion debater. Charles Lindbergh and his partner D.A. Bjornson made history in 1950 because D.A. was short for Dorothy Ann, and she was the first woman to make it to the final round of the National Debate Tournament. They lost, and later scholarly review indicates they might well have been robbed because of a bias against having a woman in the final round. But to this day, we revere the memory both of D.A. Bjornson and of Charles Lindbergh. And on your tour, next tour of campus, I can't wait to show you both. Right now, let's go find out how a Coke machine caused a crisis. This way. Friends, I want to thank you for sticking with us this long, and remember, when you come back to campus, I can't wait to give you a tour in person, but until COVID's behind us, we're all going to wear masks together and take care of each other. Now I'm going to tell you about how the Cola Wars came to Augustana campus on a beautiful day in 1998. On that day, we dedicated the building behind me. This is the F.W. Olin Educational Technology Center, dedicated to the service of generations of Augustana students to come. It was a big day because we were also going to dedicate our science building, now known as the Robert and Patricia Hansen Hall of Science. We had everything set. We had a nice stage for the choir. The band was going to play. The chair of the Augustana Board of Trustees, Brenda Barnes, a 1975 graduate of Augustana, and at that time the CEO of Pepsi-Cola North America, was going to come right here and lead us in all these great celebrations. Well, that morning I was walking campus with my boss, just making sure everything was taped down where it should be and all that kind of stuff, when we came to just about the spot where I'm standing right now and looked at the window above the main doors to the Olin Center. Now I want you to picture with me, friends. Beautiful, crisp, clear November 1, 1998 morning. Couldn't be more perfect. Perfectly framed in the windows of what was then the faculty lounge was a Coke machine. All right, we thought, we have liberal arts educations. We can figure this out before the CEO of Pepsi-Cola gets here. So we thought about maybe launching a petition drive with the faculty. Maybe they would entertain RC Cola. We had no idea. In the end, our liberal arts educations came to use, and we threw a blanket over the doggone thing. And a blanket stayed over it for the rest of the day. Now I want to tell you, many years later, on her last visit to Augustana College, I was escorting Brenda. We were driving in one of the college's electronic vehicles, and we stopped right here, and I said, Brenda, I got to tell you something. And from start to finish, I told her the whole story. And she smiled and she said, oh, Kai, you did the right thing. And that's who Brenda Barnes was, and why she'll always be one of the most remarkable women in the history of Augustana College. All right, next up, we're going to find out about a sea monster discovered in Nebraska. Don't believe me? Come this way. Friends, so far on our tour, I've taken you to some pretty magical places at Augustana, but few places are as near and dear to the hearts of many an Augustana Viking as the Fryxell Geology Museum. This is a place where looks can be deceiving. For instance, where we're standing right now, we're in front of a sea monster from Nebraska. This is a mosasaur, and it came to us by a very interesting set of circumstances. There was a farmer in Nebraska named Carlisle Campbell, and during the Dust Bowl drought days, he was out plowing his fields, getting ready to plant, and he chunked into a big block of rock. Now most farmers would take that and just throw it into an old creek bed, but not Carlisle, because not only was he a very gifted farmer, he was also a very avid paleontologist. He meticulously took every single inch of bone out of the rock fragment of our mosasaur here and set them out on a long table in his barn, where he would charge a small fee of a nickel or a dime, all the proceeds going to his local school for folks to come and see it. Well, one day his pastor said, you know, Carlisle, if you gave your sea monster to our college out there in Rock Island, well, people will be able to see it long after you and I are fossils too. And that's what Carlisle did. So a group of students went out and brought these back and very carefully mounted them in this plaster matrix. And so our mosasaur, our Nebraska sea monster, has been part of Augustana ever since. But there's so much more to show you. Speaking of sea monsters, let's find one from Ohio. Come with me this way. This museum has millions of years of stories, far more than we can have time to tell you. But I told you I was going to show you an Ohio sea monster, and here it is. This is Dunkleosteus. Dunkleosteus was discovered in Cleveland Shale. It's from the Devonian period, when just about every predator's mouth didn't have teeth, it had can openers, because everything in the Devonian was armored. And to get through that armor, you needed some pretty imposing teeth. So this is another one of the highlights. But No trip to the Fryxell Museum is complete without enjoying our nearly one-of-a-kind Cryolophosaurus ellioti unearthed by an Augustana faculty member and student assistants in Antarctica. Then, of course, there's our cathedral amethyst, 5 feet of mineralogical wonder, all created thanks to a volcanic burp in the Amazon forest. But all that aside, once again, looks are deceiving, and this fairly plain-looking set of tannish rocks are what are some of the most important and impressive things that we have to offer our visitors to the Fryxell Museum. Imagine it's 150 million years ago along the northern shores of the Tethys Sea in what is now Germany. Well, some ill-fated animals met their end and fell into a sponge-like reef, where not only were their bones preserved and fossilized, tissue was too. Here we see the wings of a dragonfly. We see the exoskeleton of a lobster-like creature. And all of this came to be thanks to an Augie student named Jim Collinson. Jim was doing some graduate study and he found himself in Bavaria. And while he was there, this was in the post-war German years, things were pretty impoverished. And Jim had a car. So he would run errands and do favors for the local folks, and they often thanked him by either giving him or selling him very cheaply Solnhofen fossils. He wrote back to Professor Fryxell, it's in our archives, they've offered me this and such fossil for $20. Can I spend $20? And Doc Fryxell wrote back, you bet, here it is and spend more. So we owe all of that to a very inquisitive and exploring Viking named Jim Collinson, who actually went on to become chair of geology at Ohio State University. Now, I've shown you a lot of cool things in the Fryxell, but you ain't seen nothing yet. Follow me to the Thomas Treadway Library to tell you a story about how you can grow by shrinking. We're in the college's library, and until about 2013, the space you're looking at right now was like any other library space. In fact, it looked a lot like what you might expect in any library, as you see here, just one floor below us. But what we decided to do was take the advice of real experts in the field of collegiate libraries who said a library has to be a gathering space for students to come together and bump into ideas and bump into their faculty and their peers. And that's what we did in reconceptualizing the Thomas Treadway Library. It starts with open spaces like this. In the room that we're standing in now, you'll find dozens of framed book covers. These are books of scholarship written by our teaching faculty to remind their students that their profs are first and foremost passionate, dedicated scholars. But by decreasing the size of the stacks, we increase size for other things. And I'd like to show you a few of those right now if you'll come along with me. As we walk through the Treadway Library, one of the things you're going to notice is that it's much more used than a traditional library often is, and that's by design. Here you'll find the Office of Student Inclusion and Diversity, our International Student Life Office, very important for a college that has grown its international enrollment by leaps and bounds in recent years. You're also going to find our Learning Commons Reading Writing Center, a very important place to make sure that students have all the resources they need and access to them in order to succeed here at Augustana and in everything they'll do afterwards. So my colleagues in student life are very busy making sure that every student is engaged and every student is equipped for success at Augustana College and beyond. Now, I don't know about you, but what I needed for success when I was in college was caffeine. An awful, awful lot of caffeine, which is why one of the most important places you'll find in the Treadway Library is Brew by the Slough. Here and in the surrounding lounge area, we have space for students to gather, interact with each other, and thankfully everyone's got their masks on, and have time to just relax. That's a large part of what we do at Augustana is care for the whole student, in mind, in spirit, and body. But you know, an important part of that health, I think, for a guy like me, is getting outside. We've been inside way too long. Will you come outside with me? Let's go this way. I am so happy you've stuck with us on this tour. Before we close, though, I want you to remember that we've got many great stories at Augustana, far too many to tell right here, but they're not all about buildings and the magic that happens inside them. There's a lot of magic elsewhere, too, and that's why we're here at the foot of the Augustana Slough. This was not an original part of the campus when we moved here in 1875. In that time, this was a marshy stream that would occasionally back up and create a pond right in the middle of campus. Over time, it was moved back, further to the downspout that's behind me, not far from that fountain over there. Well, in 1990, when we finished the library, we completed this portion of the slough, a beautiful little idyllic setting, but it wasn't always that way. In 1941, if you can imagine, everything behind me was really nothing but poison ivy, mosquitoes, and mud. And that's when Conrad Bergendorf, our 5th president, decided to buy that swamp from a fellow named Olaf Servin, whose house is just up the slough a little ways. Many years later, our President Bergendorf was talking with his financial secretary, the financial secretary of the college, Glenn Brolander. And he said, Glenn, back in 1941, everybody thought I was crazy for buying that land. But you know what? It made us neighbors with the Weyerhausers. The Weyerhausers estate, house on the hill, and it's 26 acres, were in fact given to Augustana just 12 years later in 1953, after the passing of Apollonia Weyerhauser Davis. From that time on, the campus grew substantially and accommodated more generations of students at our Erickson and Westerland Residence Center, the PepsiCo Student Recreation Center, caring for our students' needs even to this very day. And it all started with a decision to buy a swamp. Before I let you go, I'd like to tell you just one more story. Our first teacher of science at Augustana, going back to the 1880s, was a guy named Joshua Lindahl. And he knew the best science he could teach his students was geology. And so he decided to plant for them 2 living fossils. These are trees that have not changed in millions of years. They were the first broadleaf species to enter the fossil record through evolution. One of those is a ginkgo, and it's not far from where we're standing now in front of the Hansen Hall of Science. But the other is this beautiful specimen right here, a sycamore. In our part of the country, sycamores rarely live longer than about 50 or 60 years. But this one had a favored location next to a great water source and in something of a swale, so the high winds that come across the prairies had no real effect on it. We're very grateful to have this sycamore. We're grateful to Joshua Lindahl and all of the foresighted people over the many decades since 1860 who've made Augustana the special place it is today. I'm so grateful you came with us. Thanks, and when you get on campus, look me up. I might have another story to tell.